All right, so last week we started out by looking at Joseph, even though we're talking about Moses. And I know I have people that think, well, you always want to talk about Joseph. I love Joseph. In fact, let's talk about Joseph this morning. No, okay, no, we won't. We'll go to Moses. But the reason we did that is because, like all of us, you have to look at your life and say, well, how did I get here? How did I get in this place, whatever? Because a lot of times, this is God's hand that leads you to the place that you're in, but it's not where you're going to stay. You've got to, even where you are, realize this is not the end result. This is not the final destination. And so, but this is a place that God has me. And he did that with Israel. He moves them out of Canaan. He moves them down into Egypt to survive and do a lot of things in Israel, as far as the community was concerned. Because I know you think, well, why didn't he just keep them there? God has his own plans and his own reasons and the way that he does things. And so they end up down, in Egypt, and they grow. I mean, they become big, they become powerful. Between Genesis and Exodus is a pretty big gap, hundreds of years. And so the numbers increase. And when that happens, the whole observation of Israel, especially by the Egyptians, all of that changes also. Even Israel looks at themselves differently now that they're in the land of Egypt than they were, when they were in the land of Canaan. Just to let you know, remind you, because I'll keep doing these air maps. So Egypt is in the upper part of the continent of Africa, and Lower Egypt is in the northern part. Upper Egypt is in the southern part. That's because the Nile River goes this way on the map, not this way as it does in North America, the way it's supposed to. It does, okay. So it goes that way. And at the very top is the Nile Delta. So the Nile River flows, and the Nile River overflows. And every year they would have these floods, and that's how they grew crops, because it's a pretty barren, deserty area. But when the Nile overflows, it takes a lot of deposits and water and stuff, and they grow their crops. In fact, Egypt actually built along the Nile River. They built structures and buildings that went halfway down in the Nile and stayed out in order to measure how much of a flood they had each year. Because the greater the flood, the more productive the fields would be and the more they would produce. I know that we don't think that way, but they depended on the floods that came from the Nile River, and they celebrated them because this was life and growth for them also. And it ends up in the Nile Delta, which is right before you get to the Mediterranean Sea. And this was a bigger kind of flooding area. And there is the land of Goshen. Don't you like that word? Goshen. And that's where the Israelites settled, and they grew, and they become massive. And now there's the city of Cairo that's there. There was an ancient city of Memphis. But it's sort of the landscape that's there. And it's the key, because there at that part is where it then crosses over into the land of Canaan and then up into Asia and things like that. So it was a key spot, and you're going to see where in Exodus where the Israelites build two cities for storage and for war, because this is where Egypt would leave from to invade, and where invaders would come into their land. So I know you say I didn't really want to know that, but that's kind of the land and the situation. And here's where they grow in the Nile Delta, and they become very prosperous. But it's not God's intention to leave them there. Eventually, they've got to move back to the land that God promised them that was their land. But you have to realize how they got there and how difficult sometimes it is to leave where you are or the place that you are. So I call this getting move out ready, because God has ways, right? When God moves us on, you found this in your life? God moves you on, he has ways of moving you on. And sometimes he has to do it in ways that are uncomfortable, because we get real comfortable and we decide, I like it here, I like it like this, and but what if God has other plans for you? And so he's gonna find ways to move them on and to move them to a better place. And so I put this to kind of start this section in your handout. What a difference 430 years makes. Because now listen, the 430 years are not from when they were first got into Egypt to this point. not quite there. The 430 years that is talked about in Exodus chapter 12 is all the way to when Moses leads them out of Egypt into this promised land. So where they are now, you've got to take out the 80 years that Moses was 80 when he leads them out, and he's not even born yet. You got to take out a few other things too, but still, they've been there, 300 years, maybe 340 years. They've been there a long time in Egypt, growing and multiplying and prospering. But of course, over that time, everything changes. And that's what we looked at the very end last week. And here are a couple of verses that we finished with last week. This was in verse number 6 of Exodus 1. In time, Joseph and all his brothers died, ending that entire generation. But their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely, say this word with me, extremely what? And they did what? Now, it's talking about Goshen. It's talking about this key delta at the end of the Nile River. But it's a really important place where they have prospered and they've grown. And the reality is, they probably didn't want to leave. I mean, they probably looked at this land and said, man, this is a great place to live. And look at how well we've done. And what the narrative in Exodus is very clear. This is Moses' writings, but that God is watching after them and he's with them. And he's built them into this large number of people. 70, 75 men come into the land. Now they're going to leave with about 600,000 men. So if you add the numbers up, women and children add in that, it's probably somewhere around 2.5 million will leave in the Exodus. I know that some historians dispute that only because they just don't believe it could happen. But you think about this country. This country officially, we're about to hit which birthday? 250 years. So think about how this country, what it was 250 years ago, when you were in school and you were studying, and where it is now, how big and how much growth and how much has happened. So you can kind of relate that, of course it could happen. You could have huge numbers, over this period of time, especially when they're in a very prosperous land or a place where they can grow. So it's God's preparing them to leave, but the truth is, I don't think they wanted to leave Egypt. And I think he has to work on them or help them, motivate them to say, yeah, but it's time to leave Egypt. This is not the promise I gave you. This is not your destination. There's a land that I promised to give you, and you still haven't gone to occupy that land. So then you see in verse number 8, it says this, eventually, a new king came to power. Here's the change. New king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. So, okay, there's a big shift because the Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, pretty much doesn't care about them at all. And all of a sudden they're viewed very differently. Look in verse number 9. He said to his people, look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. That's a scary thing. Now, Egypt was pretty big. He's probably talking about in that area, but still it's a very scary thing because that area is key as far as invaders would be concerned, trade would be concerned. It's such an important location, and so he was probably worried. I told you last week, the Hyksos came, invaded, took over Egypt. The rulers from the Hyksos were Semitic, so they were up in Canaan and in Asia, and they came down from there. So they understood invaders. They understood the threat of a different people as far as the rule of this mighty Egypt was concerned and the riches of Egypt. So look at verse 10. He said, we must make a plan. This is Pharaoh. To keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and they will fight against us. Then they will escape from the country, which is kind of funny. Is he talking about leaving the country, or is he talking about escaping from the control of the Egyptian power in the land of Egypt? Not sure exactly, but certainly at least one of those, maybe both, is kind of woven into his statement. So then in verse number 11, it says, so the Egyptians made the Israelites their what? Yeah. So here's what we need to do. We need to put them under us, because up until this point, they were pretty free all because of the legend of Joseph and what he had done. They had great freedom, and all of a sudden we need to take that freedom away from them, or they could be a threat to us. And he says, so they appointed brutal slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build the cities of Pithom and Ramesses, and these are the storage cities in that area that were built so that the armies could move back and forth, and so they would have the resources at the edge of Egypt that they needed. It says these are supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread, and the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives, say this word with me, what? Bitter, yeah. Let's really upset them. It's the picture that Israel, even with the new struggles, is not really upset much. They're still growing, they're still multiplying, they still seem to love life, and let's do something. And probably because the Egyptians are saying, we're pretty bitter, we're threatened, we're in fear, so we need to do something to change their whole approach and their attitude, forcing them, they made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and to make bricks and to do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. Mud bricks were important in Egypt. I know that we think of the pyramids and the structures that they made and all of the stone that they used, but the reality is most of the building that was done by far was done with mud brick because it was an easy way to make a building block. In fact, now if you actually go to some of the old pyramids, some of them being 4,000 years old, maybe even older than that, some of the original, the stone is gone on a lot of them because it's been taken to be reused, but what is left is the mud brick core of those pyramids, and it's still intact. You can still pick up a mud brick from 4,000 years ago and handle it because in that deserty climate, it just survived really well. So they're gonna force them to make more and more bricks, force them to work the fields, force them to supply, and try in this way, to just beat them down in life. I don't know if you're here and you kind of feel like that's me, I feel like that's my position in life. Because I certainly think sometimes in life we get there. We just feel like it's not fair. I'm not being treated the same way as everyone else. It just seems like life is harsh and life is tough. And I look at it this way. I think during those times, your faith may be challenged. When it is, your sense of right and wrong is challenged. Your sense of how you should act, what morality is, can be challenged because you can just say, why am I doing it? And I'm just gonna give up on it. But at the same time, when things go really well, it gets challenged also. When things are going your way, when you're doing well, all those things can get challenged because you can think, I'm kind of above that. I don't have to worry about those things. So who they are, who Israel is, their faith and their trust in God is still incredibly central to who they are. In fact, historically, this is what holds them together through time, through circumstances, the things that they went through. It is this faith and this trust that God is still with them. He's still watching after them, not their circumstances. It overcomes those circumstances. And that is the great legacy of Christianity for you and I, is our faith makes a difference. Our faith is what binds us together. I was meeting with a group a couple months ago, and they were talking about, it's a group that I'm a part of, and how do we work in communities with people and pull all people together? And as I said, just to be honest, it's a really hard thing to do if you don't have a common core of what you believe and what you hold to and who you follow in your life. Because that tends to be the thing that pulls us together and causes us to work together for common good in good times and in really tough times and in struggles. And this is the reason why when Israel is talked about in the New Testament and they go back, they're always going back and speaking of Israel's faith And that means how they trusted God, how God continued to show up. And even when they didn't feel like God was close or they couldn't see him, they still had this trust that God was watching after them, he was caring for them, he had a plan for them, and he had a destination for their life. That all comes because of this belief that you have. The reason I say that is, you may be here and you may say, well, I don't really have that. Well, then it's hard to have a sense of what your future is gonna be if you don't really have a reason to believe that that future is gonna be there. It just, things happen randomly, good and bad. But if there's not someone guiding and leading and moving us along, then it's difficult to understand that. That's why last week we talked about, if you don't know where you come from, it's hard to understand where you're gonna go, because there are kind of points in your life, and one point leads to the next. So where you came from will lead to where you are, and if you kind of look at that, you can kind of set a trajectory for where you're headed. And if you don't like where you're headed, if you look at your past and you look at where you are, and you say, I don't like the trajectory, well, then maybe you need to, find something that would give you a different trajectory in life, right? To give you a different sense of destination, because that is exactly what God does. And as we look back at Israel, you can see where they came from, where they were at this time, and where God has them going, and it builds in us this hope and this expectation that God has great plans for us. It doesn't mean we won't go through tough times. But he still has great plans for us and what he built us for, what he was thinking of when he gave us life. So how does God get you to move when you don't want to move? Well, as I said, Pharaoh's one of them. Egypt is one of the factors he's going to use to move Israel. And look what it says in verse number 15. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives. So oppressing them wasn't enough. I need to go in and I need to do something else to slow them down and to stop their growth and the power of who they are. Here's what he said to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. I know we get in a lot of trouble with that, but here, this is just Pharaoh, right? But because the midwives, say this part with me, because the midwives what? Yeah, again, it's not that they shake and rattle, when they hear the name of God. It means they look to God for their future, and they look to God as the one who determined these things. So it's this healthy fear, respect of who God is that caused them to do and not to do things in their lives. And so as Pharaoh comes in, he says, I want you to kill the boys. Now, why do you want to kill the boys? Probably because Pharaoh's just looking at it as most of the soldiers came from the boys. So I want you to kill the boys. If it's a girl, it's okay, but kill all the boys to the midwives. Why are two midwives named? Have no idea. Some people think this is because they were probably the chief midwives among this large group of Hebrew people. Don't really have any idea why he names them, but he does. And it is their fear of God that causes them now to disobey the Pharaoh of their day. Because they fear God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. So in verse 18, when the king of Egypt called the midwives, why have you done this? He demanded. Why have you allowed the boys to live? The Hebrew women, they said, are not like the Egyptian women. Okay, they're tougher, they're stronger is what they're about to say. It's just not the same, Pharaoh. You don't understand dealing with, with these women in this working class area, and they're hardy, they're vigorous. They say that that when the babies come too quickly, and we just don't have time to go and kill the boys, and so they get passes. Is this truthful? Is this bending the truth a little bit and all too? Probably bending the truth a little bit, right? You'd say they're being loyal to their own people because of their fear of God, and so they found a reason to say why they're not doing this. Here's my question. I think this is Pharaoh's smart. I mean, Pharaoh's a very powerful leader. Pharaoh is also a politician. He understands how all the games are played. You think Pharaoh believed this? Something to ponder, isn't it? You think Pharaoh bought their explanation? I don't. I don't think he did at all. I think he understood what they're saying, why they're saying it. I just don't think he buys the explanation, but he has to work it because this is his way of trying to control the population of the Hebrews in a way that where it doesn't look like that they've just walked in with soldiers and gone in to kill them. It says, so God was good to the midwives in verse 20. And the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. So despite the persecution, despite those plotting against them, they continue. And the reason is, the explanation is because God is good to them. See, again, it's that belief that is beyond their circumstances that they say, no, this is why we continue to prosper, because of God himself. It reflects all the way back into their past to who Joseph was. Joseph is sold as a slave into Egypt. Joseph becomes the property of Potiphar. Then he's falsely accused and he's thrown into prison. And through all of this, what the Egyptians who saw him observed Joseph's life was God was with him. That's how they saw it. God was with him. He prospered. He's put in trusted positions. He has the ability to understand things that the rest of us don't get, we don't understand. And as I love, is one of my favorite parts of Joseph's story, when the Pharaoh is looking for someone that he can trust. I want someone that I can trust to put over Egypt during the 7 years of plenty that Joseph said would come. And during those years, rather than eat everything, waste everything, because 7 years of famine are coming, I need someone that I can put in that position during great times of prosperity that is smart enough to prepare for the struggling 7 years that would come later. And if you go back in Genesis, you can read it. It says that Pharaoh looked around and said, none of the guys I have working for me can do it. Great confidence, right? He knew, he understood people. He says they won't do it. When the 7 years of plenty come, they'll just eat it all. They'll just party. They'll just be, just be wasteful with everything. And then the 7 years of famine come and we'll be in a disastrous place. So what do I do? Who do I put in charge? Who did he put in charge? Joseph. Joseph, Hebrew. Joseph, slave. Joseph, prisoner, because of the accusations against him. Joseph is the guy that he looked at, and something about who he was and his character, which is also they speak of as they understood that his God was with him. This is the guy I should put in charge because I can trust him. I don't know if you grasp the power of that. And I know that trust is one of those things that on the immediate, in the short term, may not look that important. And a lot of people just kind of blow it off quickly and say, I know it's the wrong thing. But when you build trust in your life, when you build trust in a relationship, trust gets through a lot of bad stuff. It does. Trust just kind of moves you on to better and better things in life. We all understand it, and yet at the same time, we've all failed in that, But trust, and God building the opportunity for you to be trusted and to be put in that position. And Joseph was the one who was trusted. Just to let you know, if you hadn't read Genesis lately, when Joseph's in that position, 7 years of plenty, he stores up massive amounts of food because they're producing the Nile is probably overflowing its banks at record levels. And they're producing and producing and producing. He's storing and storing and storing because Joseph knows the famine is coming. And when the famine comes, you can go and read it, he's selling then to the people. And he's buying for Pharaoh and for Egypt. And he buys everything, including the land and things from foreigners. And it's just a time of famine. But for Israel, it's a time of increased prosperity. That's the way it works. and Joseph is the guy. Joseph is the one in those positions. Just, I love this part. So archaeology is just kind of going and going and going. And you would never expect that you would go into, Egyptian archaeology, which is amazing because of the preservation of it, and finding any reference to Joseph as the second in command, the guy who was kind of running things for Pharaoh. But there are those who believe that there are references, not because of anything directly, but that there are references to these very, very powerful, important people who are not Pharaoh, who were honored, and some of them believe because at this time there were some people that may have been Joseph who was referenced, because he becomes legendary. Not referenced as a foreigner, he would be referenced as Egyptian, but he's not the Pharaoh, and yet he is given incredible prominence, and that is Joseph. And this is the legacy of Israel. I think it's the legacy of Christianity also, because Christianity is still built on the same thing. You know, people who are steady, who are faithful, who do the right thing, they're not always the most showy person, they're not always the person who's the one in the news, but they are the core, the heart of how things move forward, and the steadiness of moving forward to a better destination. Okay, it's a whole nother sermon. Sorry I got off on that. But yeah, anyway, this is the life that Joseph has, and the midwives are kind of a push forward of this. And it says that they continue to multiply, continue to grow, and because the midwives fears God, he gave them families of their own. Now, some say the midwives were midwives because they could not have children, and all of a sudden they had children. I don't know if that's true or not, but he's saying something about how they were blessed because of what they did and the risk that they took. And then it goes on to say in verse 22, then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people. So now he's really frustrated. Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live. So Pharaoh's become desperate because his maneuvering and all has not worked, so he wants his own people to jump in and to do this. So I put in your outline, what a great time to start a family, right? If you have a boy, the boy's gonna be thrown into the Nile River. I don't know exactly all the traditions around that. Some people believe that this signifies that the Egyptians would at times sacrifice their children to the Nile. I don't see in history or anything a lot of reference to anything like that. It's probably just, once again, because they view the Nile as sacred, as Pharaoh is thinking, let's just get rid of all the boys and just put them into the river. So here's a great time to start a family. I like this in chapter number 2. About this time, a man and woman from the tribe of Levi got married. Okay. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. This would not have been uncommon in their day to take reeds, make something floating out of it, some sort of boat, and cover it with tar and pitch in order to waterproof it. She put the baby in the basket. She laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance watching to see what would happen to him. Incidentally, Moses' sister and his brother-in-law, they're named later, and the mom and dad are named later, but at this part, they're not named. So verse number 5, soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. This little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. Here's what she says. This must be one of the what? The Hebrew children. Yeah, because she understands. She's in the royal court. She knows exactly what is going on. This has to be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Then the baby's sister approached the princess. Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? She asked. She said, yes, go do that. So it's real important that she has been watching after the baby for the mom. So the girl went and she called the baby's mother. Take this baby and nurse him for me. The princess told the baby's mother, I will pay you for your help. So there's nothing like getting to be mom and somebody paying you, right? I mean, this is even better for her, you know. So the woman took her baby home and she nursed him. Later, when the boy was older, her mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him, okay, there's the name, right? What'd she name him? Moses. It was really Charlton Heston, but we call him Moses, and she named him Moses, for she exclaimed, I lifted him out of the water. So there is some debate, again, about the name Moses. Best I can tell, Moses is an Egyptian name. It's a name that meant the son of, or the one who came from. Some of the pharaohs would have Moses on the end of their name. There was like Tutmos, and that is the same word or name there at the end of it. It just meant the son of Tut. So, you know, and so it was not an uncommon expression. And she just looks at him apparently, and she names him someone who came out of, or son of. But it's interesting that the word sounds very much like the Hebrew word that is at the end of that, where she says, I drew him out of the water. And the Hebrew word for drawing him out or for taking something out sounds very similar to the name of Moses. And I think it's because of that tie there. And of course, I think it's a word play in the narrative also, where she has adopted him. She has drawn him out of destruction to herself. Who would have thought, right? But who would have thought, you know, Israel goes down into Egypt and becomes a mighty nation in Egypt. So here's the rescuer, Moses, that God, we will find out, has sent. This little boy has become the rescuer 80 years later of Israel. And the rescuer is taken out of the Nile in a basket, very symbolic. She is cared for by the princess of Egypt. And she adopts him as her own. And she says, as she names him, for I drew him out of the water. Is it a picture? Yeah, sure it is. Exactly who he's gonna be. What's gonna happen with Moses' life, and what God is gonna do through this little baby who will grow into a man, who will go through all sorts of trials and struggles and difficulties and wrestle with, you know, who he is and who God is, but will be the rescuer and the redeemer of Israel, you know. Just kind of an amazing story of this man. So I did put this last question in your outline because I think it's worth kind of contemplating. Why did God give the people Moses? Why Moses? Why this story? Why do it this way? And there are going to be a lot of answers that we're going to run into. I think as you read the rest of Exodus, you're going to say, wow, just look at what happened. Because Moses is raised in the royal court. So he is given the finest education for 40 years of his life that you could possibly have. As I told you when we started, Moses writes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, as well as some other things. But he writes the law, or the first 5 books called the Pentateuch. They are the foundation for the Hebrew faith. And even as Christians, they are foundational in our understanding and our belief also because of what they anchor and how they set it all up and the parallels that are there as God being a rescuer and sending someone for us, and he comes out from among us. And you know, so Moses becomes key for them. He becomes important for them. But it won't be without trials. Moses will have his own struggles, his own difficulties. Moses will do what you and I do also. He'll try to figure out how to fix it himself. He'll try to take his understanding of what he can do and think somehow he has to take all of that upon his shoulders. And he will struggle with all of that, even before God, even saying, am I ready? Am I worthy? As I was driving this morning, I was trying to think back when I was younger. Maybe, you know, you can think back that far. It's kind of hard for me to think back that far, but you know, when I was younger, I still remember the teenage years, right? Remember the teenage years? And I remember where I was just growing so fast. Physically, I was growing. Mentally, I was growing. Personality is growing. And in some ways, how I felt like I'm invincible, you know, so I can do anything. And you know, and people encourage you to feel that way too, because they want you to, you know, be positive and believe in your future and everything else too. But how so many times when I felt that way, it got me in trouble because I overstepped what I could possibly do, or I underestimated my own importance or my own capabilities and whatever. And so you had to learn those lessons because you got knocked down, or, it didn't work out, or you weren't as smart as you thought you were. But at that age, you think you know everything already. And I remember going through all those things. And I still remember getting out of the car one time. My mom and dad were there, and I got out of the car, and I saw my own reflection in the window of the car as I got out. I think I was just starting to drive. And I was like, wow, isn't that amazing? So, wouldn't everybody like to be me? Really, I'm just telling you, I didn't say that. But I remember that feeling. I remember thinking something like that. And just thinking that, as we do, that the future is just going to be just like this. And then all of a sudden, it's not like that. It's different. And it's harder. It's tougher. That feeling goes away. The growth, doesn't go the same way it always gone before. And it's easy then to find out, you didn't realize it, but you were putting your confidence in the way things were, the way things were kind of working, and not putting your confidence in the one who directs all of the workings and who has his own plans and watches after our lives. And so you're going to go through those periods of time also, as Moses will, where it didn't work out as well as he thought it was going to work out. The end is not what he thought it was going to be, but God actually had a better ending to it. It was a better place. I say that because, again, I think it reinforces trusting God, believing God, fearing God, as the midwives did. I look at that, and I don't know about you, but I read that, and I see the midwives and their names, and I think, I don't want to be a midwife. That's just the way I see it. Okay, you may not see it that way. But then you just look at it and say, but God uses people that you may say, that's not the life I want. But he uses them anyway. He has plans for their lives, which is really important for you to hold on to, because one day you might look at your own life and say, I didn't want this life. That's not what I wanted to be. That was not my dream or my plan. But what if God had a bigger dream? What if God had plans for your life that you didn't understand, you didn't have, but you have to go through these things that you're going through to get there? Can you hold on? Can you believe him, trust him? It's the midwife. Can you fear God enough, knowing God holds the future, that you will just stay in there, hang in there, go through your ups and downs, but you hang in there and you don't quit, knowing that God is faithful, which is what Moses came to the conclusion at the end, and what the midwives believed even then. Let's pray together. And Lord, we thank you that despite the challenges of life and the struggles that we go through, the hard things, the difficult things, as well as the good things, that you are still there and you're still faithful. And you still see so much more than we see and that we understand. And that you have plans and destinations that we may have no idea how we're going to get there or exactly where we're going to be, but what we've learned is we should put our hope and our trust in you. We should fear you, knowing that you have control of things that we don't have control of. And that your love for us and your compassion for us, your guiding us, that becomes the strength of our lives in the good times, but also in the tough times. In the times when we're really excited and we're pretty full of ourselves, and in the times where we're not that excited and life seems boring or mundane, and we kind of lose that enthusiasm in life. So maybe you're in that place right now as you're praying. And maybe this would be a good time to tell God, Lord, I need kind of a renewal. I need to go back to the things that are foundational to my spirit, my mind, how I think, how I work, knowing who you are and building my life upon those things. Because I trust, I believe that you have a future for me and for those around me, those that may even be attached to my life also. Whatever you're going through, the good news is even now with your head bowed, you can tell God about those things. He knows already. But you can tell him knowing he cares about those things. And that they're not things that he can't handle. But instead, God's very capable of leading you through those things and taking you to the future that he has for you. If you've never put your hope, your trust in God, that like Moses, he wanted to rescue us, and he sends a rescuer. And Moses is just a picture of the rescuer he would send in his son when the Son of God would come and live in this life just like us and go through all the struggles we go through, all the routines that we go through, but live a sinless life so that he could offer himself as a bridge between us and the Father so that our sins would be forgiven. Our unrighteousness would be taken from us. He would bear it, and he would give us a new position, a new place where we would know our Father, the guidance and the leadership that he brings. You can say, Lord Jesus, forgive me my sins. Show me your way. Lead me. I know I'll continue to fail and make mistakes, but I thank you that you've never quit. You've never given up. I want to know you. I want to follow you. I want you to fill me with a new life, a new enthusiasm, your new spirit. In Jesus' name I pray.